Hi third graders, today in math we are going to do lesson 19 and we are going to continue to talk about and plot fractions on the number line. We're going to use our number line to compare as a strategy to compare fractions. Let's look first at this application problem. Thomas has 2 sheets of paper. He wants to punch 4 equally spaced holes along the edge of each sheet. Okay, first of all, let me get the paper and show you, because you always have to imagine, and actually I suggest that you also get 2 sheets of paper and you do it, because it's always easier to imagine. So you have 2 sheets of paper, 1 and 2. He wants to punch 4 equally spaced holes along the edge of each sheet. Okay, so we're looking at the sheet of paper. Along this edge, Thomas wants to punch 4 equally spaced holes. So I'm not going to start at the edge. I'm going to start here. And then I have to always leave the same space, so the same space from the edge to the first hole, then to the second hole, then to the third hole, then to the fourth hole, and then to the other edge. Okay, so along this edge, you have to have 4 equally spaced holes. Draw Thomas's 2 sheets of paper next to each other. So one next to the other, like this. So the ends meet. And then you're going to label a number line from 0 at the start. So at the start of one page, you'll have 0. Then you'll have 1. And then you'll have the next sheet of paper. And then at the end of the next sheet of paper, you'll have 2. So at the bottom of your 2 sheets, you will have a number line labeled 0 at the start, 1 at the end of where one sheet ends, and 2 where the second sheet ends. Show Thomas where to hole punch his papers and label the fractions. So what you're going to do is get 2 sheets of paper, doesn't matter the size, and you're going to show Thomas, you're going to draw a little circle, a little dot, where he has to punch his holes. And he has to punch 4 holes on each sheet of paper, and they're equally, the distance between each hole is the same. All right, so try to do this, pause the video, and then you'll come back and see if you did it the same way I did. Okay, so this is what you should have. So as you can see, here's the first sheet of paper and here's the second sheet of paper. The ends meet, so we put them together. And these circles are where Thomas should punch his holes. So you see you can't punch a hole right at the beginning where you have the 0 of your number line. You have a certain space and then you punch a hole, then the same space. Now, this is obviously where they're not measured exactly. And even if you didn't measure exactly, that's okay. But the idea is that they're equally spaced. So first hole, then a space, second hole, then a space, third hole, then a space, fourth hole, and a space, and you get to the end of the first sheet. And then you do the same with the second sheet, okay? What is the question? The question was what, so you draw a circle or a little dot where you have to punch the hole. And then you have to think, what fraction is labeled at the 8th hole, which is the last one of the second sheet, okay? So we have 4 on the first sheet, 4 on the second sheet. On the 8th hole, what fraction is it? So first of all, to know what fraction, I need to know what my fractional unit is. And how do I know what my fractional unit is? By seeing how many intervals there are. So I have to see in how many equal parts I divided my whole. My whole is my whole sheet. So from 0 to 1 is 1 sheet. So look at the number line below. I have from 0 to 1, that's my whole, 1 whole sheet. In how many equal parts did I divide it to have those 4 holes? So it's true that I punched 4 holes, but I have 5 equal parts, right? Because I have from the edge, which is the 0, to the first hole, then from the first to the second hole, that's 2 parts, then to the third, that's 3 parts, 4 parts, and 5. So I divided into 5 equal parts. There are 4 holes, but 5 equal parts, okay? At this point, I know how to label my fractions. So first of all, I know I have fifths. I start with a 0. The 0 is obviously the edge of the sheet, 0 fifths. Then I will have 1/5 at my first hole, 2/5 at my second, 3/5 at my third hole, 4/5 at my fourth hole. Then 5/5 is where the end of the sheet, okay, 5/5. And then I carry on, 6/5, 7/5, 8/5, and 9/5, and 10/5 is where the second sheet ends. So my question was, what fraction is labeled at the 8th hole? And that is 9/5. Okay, so 9/5 is labeled at the 8th hole. All right, let's look at another problem. Okay, we're taking a step back now. We're not using the number line for a moment. We're going back to our rectangles, to our shapes, okay? Because we want to compare fractions. You're going to do this, follow me and do it, get pencil and paper and follow me. You're going to draw two rectangles and you're going to partition both rectangles into 4 equal parts, into fourths, okay? Then you're going to shade the top rectangle to show 1/4 and you're going to shade the bottom rectangle to show 3/4 or 3 copies of 1/4. 3/4 is 3 copies of 1/4. 3 times 1/4, that's 3/4. Okay, so you should have a drawing more or less like this, okay? Compare the models. Which shaded fraction is larger? Well, I can see it quite obviously, okay? So 3/4, this shaded fraction is larger, and I can see it. And it makes sense because I shaded 3 copies. In the first rectangle, I shaded 1 copy of 1/4, okay? 1/4. In the second one, I shaded 3 copies, 3 times 1/4. Okay, so obviously that one is larger. Now what you're going to do is you're going to draw a number line from 0 to 1 underneath your rectangles. Okay, so you're going to use these rectangles underneath. You're going to draw a number line that goes from 0 to 1 and you're going to partition it into fourths just like you did with your rectangles. You're going to label the holes and the fractions on the number line just like we've been doing for quite a few lessons now. All right, so if you did it, it should look like this. So you have your segment of the number line that goes from 0 to 1, that's 1 hole, and you partitioned it into 4 equal parts, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4. And you labeled, you plotted your fractions on the number line. You labeled these tick marks, okay? How can we compare 1/4 to 3/4 using the number line? How do you know which is the larger fraction? Okay, so let's go back a second. When you have the shapes here, these rectangles, it's pretty obvious that 3/4 is the larger fraction. What about when you have a number line? How do you know that 3/4 is a larger fraction? So here we have our 1/4 and here we have our 3/4. Pause a second and think about it. All right, so if you said that it's bigger because it's closer, it's farther away from the 0, and it's closer to the 1, you are absolutely right. So the number line goes on forever, even before the 0 you have negative numbers. But let's just consider from the 0 on, okay? You're moving towards the right from the 0, and if you're considering the whole numbers, you have 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and the numbers get bigger. As you move towards the right, as you continue, the numbers keep getting bigger, even the whole numbers. You go from 1 to 2 and so on. It's the same with the fractions. So between 0 and 1, that's 1 whole, you have lots of fractions. Here we just wrote fourths, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, but we could write other fractions. We could write eighths and thirds. As you move towards the right, your fractions get bigger. So if you're comparing two fractions, which one will be smaller? The one that's closer to the 0, okay? If a fraction is closer to the 0, it will be smaller. As you move towards the right, the fractions get bigger. In this case, it's quite obvious. 3/4 is closer to the 1, and anyway, it's farther away from the 0 than 1/4. So it's obviously bigger. You can also consider it like covering a distance. So if you imagine that this is a race, and oops, here we go. You imagine that this is a race. This is the 0 is your starting point, okay? And you have to get to 1. That's your finish line. Okay, so here's the start, and here's your finish line. This is the distance that you cover. So here you've covered, when you get to this point, 1/4 of the distance. Here you've covered 3/4, which is more. You're closer to the finish line. All right? Okay, let's look at what you need to do for today. All right, so your work for today is, again, to plot fractions on the number line. And try to do this, okay, on the first slide. Try to do this. You have to plot fractions on 3 different number lines. Try to do it as accurately as possible, because you will go back to these number lines later on when you're comparing on the next slide. When you're comparing fractions, you will go back to these number lines. So here you have 3 number lines, all right? And you have different fractional units. So here you have halves, here you have fourths, here you have eighths, okay? What is the first thing that you do? So you have a number line. What's the first thing that you do? Look at the numbers on the number line. Oh my gosh. Okay. Look at the numbers on the number line. So I have a 0, I have 1, I have 2, and I have 3. Okay, so I have 3 holes. From 0 to 1 is 1 hole. From 1 to 2 is a second hole. From 2 to 3 is a third hole. My fractional unit is halves. Keep skipping to the next slide. My fractional unit is halves, so I need to partition each whole into 2 equal parts. So I think I can grab this, yes, and I can partition. I'm going to do this. We'll do this together, and then you'll continue on your own. All right, so you partition your 3 holes into halves, and then you have to grab these fractions and plot them on your number line. So you have to place these fractions above or below a tick mark in the right position, of course. So 0 halves will obviously go above the 0. Then you have 2 halves. I know that's 1, so I'm going to place it here. 3 halves is 2 halves plus 1 half, so I'll place it here, and so on. So you place all of your fractions. Then you do the same with the next number line. Okay, so here, be careful, because you have a second number line. I'm noticing that it starts with a 0, just like this one. It ends with a 3, so the other end point is 3. But I am missing, what am I missing? 2 whole numbers. Remember, I have to have all of my whole numbers. Why do I have to have all of my whole numbers? Because when I go and partition into fourths, I have to partition each whole into fourths, not this whole segment, not this whole interval. That would be a mistake. How many holes do I have? I have, again, 3 holes from 0 to 1. So I will have to, let me just show you, okay? So here I will have to write 1, and then I will do another tick mark for 2. And I have 3 holes, and I have to partition each hole into fourths, not this whole segment, okay? And then again, I will plot these fractions. I will place them in the right position. And I will do the same thing for this third number line. Remember, I'm seeing, first you have to look at what numbers you have. I'm seeing 0 and 3. Are there whole numbers between 0 and 3? How do we count? 0, 3? No. 0. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So I have three holes from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3. I have to partition each of these holes into, this time the fractional unit is eighths, and then I place my fractions on the number line. Why are we doing this? We've been doing it for a while now. And why did I say you need to try to be accurate? Because on the next slide, you will have to compare fractions. And it will be useful to go back to this first slide with your number lines, especially when you're comparing 2 fractions that do not have the same denominator. So the fractional unit is different. So if you have done a good job here, you will be able to easily compare even fractions with different denominators, okay? And then on these last 3 slides, what are you going to do? Choose a greater than comparison that you made in problem 2. So you're going to go back to slide 2, and because you're using greater than, smaller than, or less than, or equals, so you're using these signs, and you're going to put them in these circles. Okay, I'm not sure if you can grab them. No, you can't. So you're using these signs to put inside of these circles. You're going to choose one greater than comparison that you made here, going to write it here, and you're going to use pictures, numbers, and words to explain how you made that comparison. On the next slide, you're going to choose a less than comparison. So you're going to go back and see where's a less than comparison that I made. I'm going to write it down here, and you're going to use pictures, numbers, and words to explain a different way of thinking about the comparison than what you wrote in problem 3, which is probably this one. Okay, so explain it in a different way. And then on the third slide, you're going to choose an equal to comparison. So you're going to find two fractions that are equal. So one is equal to the other. You're going to choose one of these, an equal to comparison, and that you made in problem 2. And again, you're going to use pictures, numbers, and words to explain 2 ways that you can prove your comparison is true. So you will do some thinking. First, you'll be using the number lines like we've been doing up to now. Then you're going to compare fractions using these number lines and explain your thinking. This is your job for today. Reach out to your teachers if you need help, and enjoy this fraction work. Bye.